watching Everything Nicaragua. I'm Tony. It's been a while since I've done a walk and talk, so I'm gonna do one right now. I'm in San Juan, just outside of my house, and today I wanted to talk about building in Nicaragua. I've done a couple, talks on building, but we just finished another building in El Coyol, which is a little town in between Hacienda Iguana Tola area and Rivas, and that was some pretty amazing challenges, and we learned a lot during the process. We found materials that work and materials that don't work. Labor, I'll talk to you a bit about labor. I'll talk to you about costs of materials and just functionality of things. That was a big one, to find out that things that work back home in, say, Canada or the US just simply don't work that well here. So I'm going to talk a bit about that, and I'll show you some pictures of what it was like building in Chileros. And then before that, I'll toss some pictures up and let you know a little bit about the Dubs wine bar. That was in Hacienda Iguana, and that was taking an existing location and turning it into a wine shop. So we got to learn about swimming pools, we got to learn about pool pumps, again, labor on getting rid of like pool tiles and how that's done without machinery that you're used to in Canada or in the US. So that was pretty interesting. We learned quite a bit about palapas and different types of wood, termites, where termites live in Nicaragua, and when not to use wood. Did quite a bit of cement and rock. So hopefully I learned a lot on that. What's most cost effective, what's most durable, and what lasts the longest. Not so much metalwork in the Dubs wine bar. That was more of aesthetics and building a really cool interior design. But at Chileros, that was a lot of metalwork. So we basically found one material that worked really well here in Nicaragua. The price point is good, but not only the price point, the readily availableness of it, because it's really important that you find something that is here today and going to be here for the entire build. So we found this stuff called uno por uno. It's a square tubular black steel metal, so it does rust, and you gotta be aware. There's no one thing that works perfectly. Even cement block isn't perfect everywhere. But this uno por uno seemed to be really strong, and there's different gauges you can get, like the interior wall. We got a lot of rain here, so we'll see what San Juan beach is like right now. I've got a feeling there's gonna be a lot of debris. But yeah, this uno por uno, and the thing with it was that you could use a tiny little welder, and you only had to learn how to do a 1-inch weld. And once you learned that, you could basically build everything that you could draw on paper. So the uno por uno worked out really well for a lot of what we do. Now I've found, just to increase the budget a little bit, and I'm using more do por do, which is 2-inch by 2-inch. Whereas where it doesn't need to be structural, uno por uno will work great. Actually, uno por uno is strong enough for pretty much everything. The difference is that weld point. If it is to rust, it's only a 1-inch weld, whereas with a 2-inch, you've obviously got twice as much weld. So it gives me a feeling of security with that 2x2 at just a little bit more cost. Those all come in like 6-meter pieces. So just moving the stuff around in Nicaragua is something to really consider. There's no way that I was able to order the correct amount of supplies. I've never been able to do that. No matter how good of a renders or CAD or whatever we're using to draw out our plans, there's always trips to get more. So 6-meter pieces of metal are a little bit tricky to move around, and delivery costs can really get you. $50 a go for delivery can definitely cost and add up a lot in the percentage of the build, because building here is actually quite inexpensive. It's pretty amazing what we got done for the amount of money we spent. So that's a uno por uno, and then you're choosing fuerte. Fuerte means strong, thick-walled uno por uno. So you can get different gauges, and it's much trickier to weld a thin metal than it is a thick metal. So the reason that uno por uno works so well is because we could show a welder how to do a 1-inch weld, and he'd get really good at it in a very short period of time. And the welder that we actually use for it, the machine, brand new, is 200 bucks. So it was like, once we figured out we could buy a welder and we could get a guy to sit there and weld all day for 10 bucks a day, it was like, wow, let's see what we can do with this uno por uno. And we found we could do everything. We were doing bar tables, bar stools, chairs, doors, walls, counters, racks, swing sets, all sorts of stuff out of uno por uno. So it really had to do with something that was readily available, something that could be taught to someone. One of the trickiest things in Nicaragua is unteaching someone. So I don't like to work with like a Nicaraguan welder. I would rather find a guy that's just super humble and nice and willing to learn, and then teach him how to do something. So back to this welding, which was such an integral part of Chileros. Like everything's welded in that place. Getting wood was hard to do, and we didn't have tools. Tools is one of the biggest challenges for sure in Nicaragua. Like, I have so many tools in Canada. I'm a tool junkie. I got boxes of everything for every trade. And here I got a machete, a hammer, a hacksaw, you know, so it's a lot harder to work here without having access to all the tools. But let's talk about a couple of the tools. So the welder, 200 bucks, amazing. Then cutting it, they like to use angle grinders. The people that I work with, if I gave them all day just to angle grind stuff, they'd be happy as can be. They love it, man. They love shining off the welds. They love, you know, cleaning off stuff with their angle grinder. They love cutting with it. The problem with cutting with it is the time that it takes for them to use, you know, we brought in proper right angles that work so that they can mark all the way around when they cut. But the problem with it is that when they cut, there's always a little bit of difference as they cut around it, right? And that little bit of difference, when they put together two parts to weld, there's a little air gap in there, and that's where the heat fluctuates. So when the heat fluctuates, they get a nasty weld. So not only was it taking forever for them to cut these uno por unos, because they have to like twist it and line it and da-da-da-da, their welds weren't amazing. I mean, they were fine, but they weren't amazing, and I'd rather just have amazing. If we're gonna work in something that simple, let's go for amazing. So what we did was we brought in a chop saw. It's a metal chop saw, and that made it so that they could get their 45s perfect. They could get their cuts, you know, right down to length really well. And it's still like, a chop saw to me is a sloppy man's tool. Like, I don't really like that at all, because it leaves a big burr on the end, and then you got to use the side of the chop saw and twist the metal around to get rid of the burr. And what I learned from some of the plumbers that I worked with in Canada, like in the wine business, I was lucky enough to work with the best plumbers, like probably in the world. And they would never use a chop saw to cut a piece of pipe. They use a battery-powered bandsaw. And the reason they use a bandsaw is that it cuts perfectly, laser precision, and doesn't leave really a burr at all. And they mainly use that, I learned that with strut. Strut was what we used to hang all the piping in the wineries and everything. We did so much work with strut. And it's very similar to an uno por uno. So with that said, you don't have a electric bandsaw here. I don't know, I've never even seen one here. I think it would confuse guys if they saw one. But it's a simple way of silently cutting too, because those grinders, man, when they're cutting in the big circular chop saw for the metal, it's so loud. And I mean, imagine hundreds and hundreds of cuts, sparks flying everywhere, and these crazy, they're not cicadas, they're other type of bug, but when those sparks are flying, they come from everywhere. And I think it's the sound. It's like the mating call. The chop saw on a uno por uno is a freaking mating call for these bugs. And they all come like crazy from everywhere. So you're like dodging bugs while you're chopping. So, sorry to go on that tangent. It's just, I really am a big fan of having the right tool for the right job. So we went from using a hand angle grinder to a chop saw, which made it so they get their angles better, and their cuts were much more exact as far as length goes, but they still had to like twist each piece of metal on the side of the blade to get rid of the burr. So the next move now is to either import or find somebody that deals in the band saws, because they're amazing. Battery powered band saws, man. Makita makes a pretty good one. My favorite one is the Milwaukee one. It's phenomenal. It's so strong, and they make it so it can cut up to a 4-inch piece of pipe or a square tube, which is amazing. So that'll really cut down with your tools. Then other tools that are, man, it's tough, is like, if you're, like when I build, I always have an impact driver on my right side and a drill on my left side, and then an extra battery pack on my belts next to my tape measure. And without those things, they're like there all the time, because I always have to pilot with a drill, and then I always have to, you know, fire in the screw, the bolt, whatever I'm using with an impact. They're not readily available. It's like the ones that I saw were like crazy expensive. It was like $700 or $800 for a impact driver and a drill that was nowhere near as of the quality that I like to work with. So I have not bought one. We actually wound up borrowing one from somebody for the entire build, and they wound up leaving it with us for the whole build. It's now gone. But that's something to consider, like the simple things, like you go and buy a Makita, you know, or like nobody has a Sawzall, you know, like a reciprocating blade, battery powered. They don't have them, and it's like, wow, I use that for everything all the time, man. Or even a vibrator saw, you know, for cutting through drywall or around little edges in the wood and stuff. Nobody's got that here. So yeah, but that said, man, I've gotten really good with a machete. I can notch out some things that I never thought I'd be able to do with a machete and a little hatchet. So that's cool. And something building in Nicaragua taught me was result-based, you know? And my dad's always been really result-based. He's always like, I don't want a half-inch drill bit, I want a half-inch hole. I don't even want a half-inch hole, I just want this job to be done. So he's always result-based. Whereas I've always been kind of in love with the process. Like I love Festools, and I love, woo, this is some mucky water I'm walking through right now. Yeah, building here definitely gets your resourcefulness on. It's pretty cool to see that happen. Tools. Even buying screws and nails, that's something to think about, because you buy them by the screw or by the nail. And I've never like used a used screw before. I'm always like, oh, that's out. It's, you know, it's cheaper to use a new one and not have it strip out or whatever. Here, like I've actually unbent screws and nails and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, there's not as much disposable, nothing goes to waste here. It's kind of a cool building environment. What else has been pretty interesting in building? I just say like the labor, it's like a different culture. It's like back in Canada or in the US, I'd have a worker, and I'd say like a good worker or a bad worker, meaning if he was framing something and he does the frame and it's done, is he doing the next thing? Like he just keeps on going and moving, and that to me was a good worker. Here it's very like cultural almost, I've found, because nobody that I met was lazy or didn't want to work. They just basically did exactly what was asked, and then they waited until you tell them or exactly ask them to do something else. So that's an interesting thing. And I found that, at one point I had like over 30 people on a job site, and I'm running around and I don't speak Spanish, and I'm trying to like, okay, you do this, all right, great, and then go over and do that one over there, and then I come back and I'm like, no, like that, like this. And I've found that I can work and manage with about four people is my team. That's about maximum. And that's with semi-English speaking Nicaraguans. Like people that they don't know all the, like I couldn't say, well, they don't speak English, but they can understand a bit. I can manage about 4 people. When it gets past that, my time is more spent like in corrective mode. So managing crews and people is totally different here in Nicaragua. That's something to think of. Weather plays such a huge role in building. And it's not like, it's raining, it's over, shut it down. It's like, it's raining, it's gonna stop in like 30 or 40 minutes. So you go, when I first started, I'd be like, all right, then let's jump to this project, and it's better just to say, hey everybody, let's just wait out the rain, because if you start the next project, the rain will stop, and then you'll try and jump back into what you were doing, and that's a waste of time is what I've learned. It's better to just stay focused on one task and get everybody set up and just crush it and let the weather play its role. And the rain definitely does stop. It just comes and then it goes. Sometimes it drops a lot of rain though. Holy cow. One time we were doing cement in the night and everybody was hustling and the rain was coming down so much. We were just throwing cement onto the sand and the aggregate because we didn't even need to add water. It was dumping on it. So that was a fun experience. And it worked out pretty well, kinda medium. Yeah, and things like, tarps or I don't know if you guys have done much cement work, but I have like, insulated cement tarps, the orange ones, and there's no tarps here. I have not seen a tarp, man. So we were using palm leaves, from a palapa to put all over the cement when the rain came, and improvising like that. Like shovels, when they break, like you take a machete and you chop down a little bit of a tree and stick it in the shovel wherever the old piece of wood was. And we did that many times. Then like no machines, like, I usually have a bobcat and a little hoe with me, and no, there's none of that here. I haven't driven a bobcat in 2.5 years. I haven't been on a machine since I've been here. But I have been with like 10 dudes digging a ditch and we get her done. It's basically, you got a pickaxe, shovels, 5-gallon buckets, whatever, and you get it done. The labor is pretty cool because everybody wants to work. And paying people, I'd say like 500 cords a day is amazing. Like they're super stoked. But if it's a long-term thing, then maybe a little less than that. But I'm really happy whenever I can give somebody about 500 cords a day for labor. And everybody that's worked with me, I'd say if you were to ask them, they'd be like, they'd want to work again with me probably. I'd like to think so at least. What else? So this, one of the biggest challenges for building is actually not permitting. Permitting is super simple. That's not the biggest challenge in the world. It's not that hard to get renders and master plans and all that sort of stuff. There's a lot of talents here that you can find to get that done. It's the leases, man. Like getting to clarity on who actually owns the property that you want to buy or that you want to lease. There was this change of hands back in the 1980 of the country, I guess, and between that time, 80 and 90, the land was divvied up to people. So they basically took all the land and then said, all right, here you go, guys. You guys all get a little piece of it. And during that time, the lots, you know, the actual lot markers and everything changed, and the ownership changed, and it got really convoluted, like who owns what. So you got to do a 40-year background check to find out the title, to find out if the person you're leasing it from or buying it from is actually the owner. And then you got to do a GPS, which is pretty standard anyways, a GPS, excuse me, survey to find out where the actual lines are, because a lot of times people would just build their house and like put up a fence and that's where it is, and it's not at all. So then you buy a property that half of the house is on the neighbor's property. So the surveying is super important. And then going and doing the taxes. The taxes are pretty interesting. Like, say, like these are just stories. So I'm not even going to tell you the stories. You'll hear your own stories. But taxes are not something to be afraid of, but they are something to be aware of, and they can all be resolved. Everything in Nicaragua can be resolved with time or money. That's one or the other. You can sit there and wait for as long as you want, and eventually it'll work out, or you can cough up some cash and pay whatever fines it is and get it done right away. So leasing and purchasing are probably the challenges. I don't know, unsolicited advice. When you're in Nicaragua, you're in a country where there's a lot of water, like a ton, dude. Like when it comes down, holy smokes, it comes down. So you may find a piece of property and go, wow, it's so beautiful. And you're like, you know, why are these trees like this, you know? And you start going, well, these trees look a little bit like they do like near rivers and stuff. And then you realize that once upon a time where you just bought that property was a river. And don't worry, because it hasn't flooded in 20 years or something. It's gonna flood, for sure, no doubt about it. And then you're gonna whine and complain about having a flooded house. So really, just don't buy any property that looks like it could be in a dried up river. That's my advice to you. And zoom way out, because these rivers are huge. There's whole developments that are on rivers, you know? And you wouldn't know it's a river until you zoomed way out and you're like, oh my gosh, it's a freaking river, dude. No wonder it flooded. So check the land, and that would be my unsolicited advice for building in Nicaragua. It's a pretty good rundown on the tools, dude. Other things, man, you can rent, like packers, something. If you're gonna build, buy a truck. Definitely get a truck. Yeah, and like really, it's either got to be like a Kia K2700, you know, one of those almost flatbed type work trucks that you can put your uno por uno, the 6 meters on the top, you know, build something like that. Or get yourself a Toyota Hilux of some sort. But even with the Hilux, man, you can't really move stuff with that truck. It's a great truck for cruising around and the occasional bags of cement or something in the back, but it's not really a work truck. That's what I found. But you're definitely gonna need a vehicle, because when you get to a job site, guarantee, the second you get there, everybody's gonna be like, all right, yeah, we got everything except for this, and we need that to do anything. And then your job is to go and get it. So you need you need cash, and you need to know where everything is. Like if I need something in Tola, if I got a little list in the morning, which every day we have a list, I'm going to like 4 or 5 ferreterias is what they're called. Because they all have the same supplier, which is so weird, but they all have different stuff. Like some of them will be like niche out in like little closing devices, like locks and like hooks and stuff. And some of them will niche out in like saw blades and discos and all the, you know, the angle grinder parts. And you kind of got to know your way around, pull it off, because you need it all. And then there's like Cinsa, which usually has everything that you need. but that's like you go into Rivas, you know, and if you're not in Rivas, you're going to these little ferreterias because you're trying to save time. Because yeah, it's amazing how much more time building takes in Nicaragua. It definitely, I think the weather has something to do with it, and I think the way that plans on paper do not work out here. And I'm a big paper guy, man. I love my business plans, I love my forecasts, I love all that stuff, but it don't work here, man. I guarantee you, if you build something and when you're finished, you'll be like, wow, that came out a lot differently than I anticipated when I began. Look at what I had on paper and look at this picture of what I built. And they're gonna most likely be two different things. You know, that said, there's the one guy that can pull it off, and you know who I'm talking about, bro. Yeah, so that's everything I got for Everything Nicaragua today, man. That was a long one. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'm not gonna have to do that for a while. If you got any building questions, feel free to give me a call. I love building stuff, whatever you need, man. Yeah, I built wineries, I've built recording studios, I've built little houses, I've built retail shops, restaurants, container homes, dang, half pipes, skateboard ramps, whatever you need, man. I love to build stuff. So hope everybody's having an awesome day in Nicaragua. I am going to keep on walking around San Juan del Sur. What is it that we say? It's been so long. Adios, nos vemos.